Hello, everyone. You're all welcome to our second panel session of the 2021 Brazilian Studies Program Conference. As you know, this year we are discussing the real and the imagined Brazil, examining narratives of dissent, and we are exploring different and urgent questions in contemporary Brazil that range from fake news and the management of COVID-19 to democracy and authoritarianism. My name is Andresa Rusca de Souza Santos, and I'm a lecturer, also course director and director of the Brazilian Studies program here at the University of Oxford, part of the Latin American Center. And the Latin American Center is also part of the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies. We do many things here at the BSP at Oxford, and one of those things is that we organize this annual and international conference on Brazil. And because of the pandemic, it is the first time that we are holding this conference online. And we hope this will also be the last time we hold it online. And I'd like to present you to my colleague and co-organizer of this year's event, Dr. Katherine Hatzikidi.
Thank you so much, Andresa, Professor Ricardo, Gabriela, Katherine, thank you so much for being with us today. Hello and welcome everyone to today's discussion. My name is Katherine Hatzikidi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Tübingen and research affiliate at the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the University of Oxford. It has been a real pleasure and privilege to participate in the organization of this event, which we hope will spark insightful debates on salient issues. Before introducing our panelists, we would like to briefly present to you this session's theme. Our panel today is titled Doing One's Job versus Keeping One's Job, Strategies of Dissent. It will examine the ethics of public service in Brazil, considering negotiations, concessions, omissions, and actions. The discussions will explore some of the tensions and conflicts experienced by members of the different technical government bodies, which range from voicing concerns to showing loyalty, and from strategizing non-direct confrontation to exiting public service.
And I have the great pleasure to present Dr. Katherine Bersch, who will be chairing the session today. Katherine Bersch, and we call her Kate, if she doesn't mind, is a professor of political science at Davidson College. She's also an investigator with the governance project at Stanford University Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. She's the author of the book, When Democracies Deliver, Governance Reform in Latin America, which was published by Cambridge University Press in 2019. Her work on bureaucratic capacity has appeared in many journals such as Comparative Politics, Governance, Public Administration Review, and Studies in Comparative International Development, amongst others.
Our presenters will speak for approximately 15 minutes, followed by comments by the chair, and they will then briefly respond before we open for questions from the audience. For those of you joining us on Zoom, our interpreters, Iris and Carolina, will be providing simultaneous interpretation from English to Portuguese and vice versa. So if you wish to change the language of your audio, you can just click on the globe at the bottom of your screen. Finally, I invite you to follow our updates on social media using the @OxfordBSP. So Katherine, thank you again for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Andresa and Katharina, for organizing this. It is with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce our first speaker, Ricardo Magnus Osorio Galvão. He holds a PhD in applied plasma physics from MIT. He specializes in nuclear fusion research. He is a professor of applied physics at the University of Sao Paulo, having previously been director of the Brazilian Center for Physics Research and director of the Brazilian Institute for Space Research in Brazil. He is a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and has received many international awards and accolades, in particular the 2021 AAAS Scientific Freedom and Responsibility Award. Thank you for joining us, Ricardo. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kate, for very nice introduction. And thank you, Andresa, for this very nice invitation. It's a great pleasure to share some ideas with you today about the topic of the meeting. Well, let me share my screen with you. And I just ask you to confirm if you are all seeing it.
We are.
Okay, wonderful. So my point today is to discuss responsible scientific work under denialist administrations. Well, I start with a paper that was 4 years ago in Scientific American. It was a comment by Professor Saba that science has always been inseparable from politics. Actually, I add some comment on that. That has been inseparable, but historically, we know that the relationship has been rather conflicted in many occasions. I'll start with a paradigmatic example of Nikolai Vavilov. Nikolai was a prominent Soviet scientist. He was an agronomist and a geneticist, and he devoted his life to study the improvement of seeds that are important for the sustainment of the world population of humanity. Actually, he traveled all over the world and collect seeds from every other place. He was in US, he was in Brazil, in South America, in the East, and in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. He created the world's largest collection of plant seeds. Around 200,000 seeds he had in his collections in different places, actually, in the Soviet Union. But he had a student, Trofim Lysenko, who was a pseudoscientist. And he had some Mendelian concepts about plant biology. And Nikolai Vavilov disagreed with him on his theories, and he starts charging Nikolai Vavilov of being against the Soviet Revolution. So Lysenko attracted the favor of Joseph Stalin. And as a result, he was arrested, sentenced to death in July 1941. He had his sentence commuted later to 20 years imprisonment, but 2 years later, he died of starvation in Princeton. Only later, Khrushchev brought his case to the public again, and his reputation was rehabilitated, and he's now considered a hero of Soviet science. So this is a first example of a struggle between science and a political leader, in this case, Joseph Stalin. Let's move to another one, a very important example, Ignac Cenaves. He was a Hungarian physician and a scientist who had very important collaboration for humanity. He was described as the savior of mothers because he was a pioneer in antiseptic procedures. He discovered that the so-called puerperal fever, or in the States, I think it's called childbed fever, could be drastically cut by the use of hand disinfection in obstetrical clinics. Actually, he published some papers and he published a book, and he proposed the practice of washing hands with chlorinated lime solutions in 1847, when he was working in the Vienna General Hospital. And now he had opposition not from politicians, but from a powerful group, the medical academia. because his observation conflicted with the opinions at the time, and his ideas were rejected by the medical community. So what they did, Cenaves was committed to an asylum by his colleagues under the argument, obviously a false argument, that he suffered nervous breakdown. In the asylum, he was beaten by the guards and died 14 days later from a wound on his right hand. So I have two examples here of struggle between science, first with politicians, and then with a very powerful group. I'll come back to that later. Now we have a modern feature that is affecting us a lot. Is the science denialism in public administrations. I even like, sometimes instead of saying denialism, I like more the Latin word negationism, although there is not in English, because it sounds somewhat stronger for me. Here you see a comment published in American Journal in 2017, warning about the political polarization of scientific issues related to global warming, which were emphasized by the Donald Trump's administration, and became a strong, another modern struggle between science and political leaders. Actually, many people, they make somewhat a confusion between what we call now science denialism and obscurantism. And I make a comment here based on this very nice paper by Swedish professor Sven Hansson, was published, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago again. And making it short, the important thing that we have to recognize about the modern scientific denialism is not obscurantism that refers to fundamentalist religious opposition to scientific results. The scientific denialism we have nowadays is a form of pseudoscience based upon persistent construction of false controversies about scientific models and results that threaten economic interests, political ideologies, or the comfortable situation of powerful groups. The two examples I just mentioned, the first one of Gavrilov was conflicting political ideologies. The second one was conflicting the comfortable situation of powerful groups. Well, and some people think that the denialism, the scientific denialism, is a matter that affects more what we call liberal politicians, conservative politicians, or righted politicians. But I will show you a very nice paper also published a few years ago, a very nice study done by those two authors on make interview with Republicans and Democrats in the United States. Essentially, they prepare an example of scientific claims that conflict with their preferred conclusions. And they carry out this study quite well. And simply, the result you can see here down. Both liberals and conservatives engage in motivated interpretation of study results and denied the correct interpretation of those results when the interpretation conflicted with their interests. And that is what is worrying us nowadays. And here I give one example, a very important one, also coming from the United States. That was a report prepared by the Union of Concerned Scientists. This report surveyed around 7,000 researchers who work in government agencies in the States. And you can see from the title here that saying that political pressure is definitely undermined their research. And that's a major concern for all of us that working in government laboratories. Now I give a tremendous example of Brazil. This is a picture published by the Deutsche Welle in Brazil, I think it was this year, was a problem, it was February actually of this year, a decision by Bolsonaro's government to oblige the scientists who work in ICMBio. Well, I'll say a few words about that. That the Institute Chico Mendes, for those of you that maybe do not know, Chico Mendes was a very important person in Brazil. He was a rubber tapper, and he worked in the Amazon very strongly to preserve the Amazon rainforest and advocates human rights for Brazilian peasants. Actually, he got an accolade, Global 500 from the United Nations, and also an American Prize for Environment. He fought strongly against what I call the predatory capitalism exploration of the Amazon rainforest. As a result, he was assassinated by a rancher in 1980. And later, Marina Silva, the great Minister of Environment who had, created this ICMBio. This is an institute that takes care of all the reserves in Brazil. The first concept, what we call a reserve that allows exploration by people without affecting the forest, was an idea of Chico Mendes. Well, and this institute, ICMBio, has many scientists. They do wonderful work. And now a decision by the Minister of Environment of Brazil, who is the leader of ICMBio, obliges all the scientists to submit approval of their paper to a lieutenant colonel of the military policy of Brazil, who is now the director of ICMBio. We know that clearance is a practice that many laboratories in the world have, but usually this clearance is studied by peer review, by expert people. In the case of ICMBio, no. The scientists have to submit to essentially a bureaucratic officer above them. Well, I was also had to face, unfortunately, this action of denialism motivated by political pressure. You all know that in August 2nd, 2019, this was published by New York Times, that Bolsonaro fired me because I had reacted strongly against his claim that the data of the National Institute for Space Research on the Amazon deforestation were a lie. And our colleagues that produced the data, they were working against the interests of Brazil. Well, my reaction was rather strong. I decided to face him, and I'll show why. And you can see here and down this page a strategy of those denialists in government. What they do again, he started publishing fake news or trying to diminish or ridicule the results of the National Institute for Space Research, saying that we were wrong, that we release monthly those results. Fortunately, all our data that we produce by the National Institute on the deforestation of the Amazon were confirmed by scientists from NASA and from the European Space Agency. And what he was criticizing, what you can see here is this wonderful data produced by the National Institute for Space Research, INPE, on the rate of deforestation of the Amazon forest that started in 1988, you have here till 2020. This is considered the best time series on deforestation of tropical forests in the world. Highly respected by the scientific community. You can see here even a citation from Science 2007 that Brazil's monitoring system is the envy of the world. And Nature saying that this decrease the Brazilian government, in Lula's government, Brazil achieved reduced deforestation of the Amazon from over 27,000 square kilometers to around 4,000 square kilometers in 2012 as a result of monitoring by the National Institute for Space Research, was considered the biggest environmental success story in a decade. So this data provided by a governmental organization, a government scientific institute, was being claimed by Bolsonaro to be a lie. So what we should do, we scientists should do, work for international, governmental institutions. I answered this question with a podcast from Nature, I think it was this year, or end of last year. Stick to science. We scientists have to stick to science, even if this costs, as was my case, our position, work position. How we can do that? We have to require the government to, and that is again a citation of the Union of Concerned Scientists. We have to be transparent in decision making. The public has to require that from the government. We have to have whistleblower rights, as I did. We have to be have the right to go against our leaders, against the government, when they claim results that are wrong scientifically and that affect the population, the public in general. We have to have the right to publish and many other things. We have to fight for that. We scientists cannot close our mouth. We have to react. And I end up with this citation I like to put at the end of all my presentations. The leader of any country should be aware that in scientific matters, there is no authority above the sovereignty of science. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ricardo Galvão. We will now turn to the presentation of Gabriela Lotta. A brief bio on Gabriela. She is a professor of public administration at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas. She coordinates the Bureaucracy Studies Center, and she is a researcher at the Center of Metropolitan Studies and holds a PhD in political science. Without further ado, Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you, Andresa and Katherine, for the invitation to be here with you. I didn't know if I should speak in Portuguese or English, but I decided to speak in Portuguese because this is the first time I will present this data. So I'm sorry, I will just turn out Portuguese, but you can have a very good translation for sure. So, bom, a minha apresentação aqui, eu vou tratar de alguns aspectos que o professor Ricardo trouxe, olhando agora para dentro da própria burocracia e como é que a burocracia lida com esses fenômenos que o professor Ricardo já apresentou. E eu vou começar falando que o conflito entre políticos e burocratas já foi longamente analisado pela literatura da ciência política. Max Weber já dizia que a democracia precisa da burocracia, já que são os burocratas que garantem a legalidade e a continuidade das instituições inerentes à democracia. Mas os burocratas podem ser um risco para a democracia caso corrompam os processos democráticos ou usem as instituições a seu favor. Este equilíbrio tênue entre políticos e burocratas é, portanto, um objeto importante na construção das nossas democracias modernas. No entanto, a literatura, em geral, olha para estes conflitos dentro do jogo democrático, no qual tanto os atores políticos como os burocratas utilizam o próprio processo democrático e as instituições a seu favor, e o conflito faz parte do jogo, portanto. Mas o que temos visto em alguns países nos últimos anos é um novo tipo de conflito entre a burocracia e a política, que acontece sob instrumentos autoritários, fora do jogo democrático, e no qual cabe aos próprios burocratas lutar pela preservação das instituições e da democracia. Não faltam exemplos, como, por exemplo, a tentativa do Trump de enfraquecer as instituições federais e a reação da guerrilha. Ou, por exemplo, Orbán, na Hungria, destruindo as universidades e a fuga dos professores para outros países. E no caso brasileiro, nós temos pelo menos 2 exemplos para relatar. O primeiro foi durante o processo de impeachment, ou pós-processo de impeachment da presidente Dilma, que para parte da sociedade foi um momento de exceção democrática. Naquele momento, parte dos burocratas se colocou como defensores das instituições em oposição às mudanças propostas pelo presidente Temer. O segundo momento, mais recente e muito mais intenso, é sob o governo Bolsonaro, que declaradamente não acredita na democracia e tem tentado atacar as políticas públicas, os poderes, as instituições e os próprios burocratas. Neste cenário, nos cabe perguntar: como se dá a relação entre políticos e burocratas em contextos autoritários, onde o jogo democrático não está operando em sua completude? Ou como a burocracia defende a democracia, as políticas públicas e as instituições? As análises que eu vou apresentar aqui para vocês são provenientes de uma pesquisa em 2 momentos diferentes do tempo. Nós coletamos dados durante o governo Temer e agora durante o governo Bolsonaro, com aproximadamente 80 servidores públicos de diferentes órgãos governamentais que estão sob ataque e processo de desmantelamento, nos quais a burocracia que nós entrevistamos e que nós estudamos estão, de alguma forma, reagindo, buscando proteger as instituições, proteger as políticas públicas e proteger a si mesmos. A primeira parte da pesquisa foi feita em parceria com o Roberto Pires e a segunda parte está sendo feita com a Mariana Costa e a Michele Fernandes. E agora eu vou começar a apresentar os meus slides, em que eu vou mostrar o nosso modelo analítico e as nossas conclusões. E já vou adiantar que o professor Ricardo Galvão é um dos nossos objetos aqui de citação deste processo de mudança e desmantelamento que a burocracia tem vivido. Vocês estão vendo minha tela, né? Bom, a nossa análise sobre este processo é uma análise relacional, ou seja, consideramos que para cada tentativa de ação opressora por parte do governo, que é tudo que está em cinza na nossa imagem, existem reações por parte da burocracia, que é tudo que está em amarelo na nossa imagem. De forma que nós temos ações opressoras e reações anti-opressoras por parte da burocracia. Mas este é um processo circular, porque para cada ação opressora nós vemos uma reação opressora que, por sua vez, gera mais uma ação opressora e assim sucessivamente. Desta forma, tanto as ações opressoras como as reações anti-opressoras precisam ser vistas de maneira contextualizada e relacional. E eu vou agora explicar cada um desses elementos que nós temos coletado na nossa pesquisa, começando pelas ações opressoras por parte do governo. Por parte do governo, a ação opressora sobre a burocracia tem operado buscando 2 objetivos fundamentais. O primeiro objetivo é uma tentativa de moldar os burocratas para que eles executem as mudanças requeridas, incluindo o próprio processo de desmonte institucional. Em segundo lugar, caso burocratas não sejam moldáveis, o que o governo faz é uma tentativa de expurgar a burocracia para que ela deixe de ser uma barreira para o processo de mudança. E o governo tem feito isso usando 4 maneiras ou 4 ações opressoras que eu vou descrever rapidamente. Eu vou descrever as ações e vocês podem ver aqui à direita, citações que eu extraí da imprensa, exemplificando os casos que nós relatamos. E o professor Ricardo Galvão vai ser uma das citações que vai aparecer aqui. Então, a primeira forma de opressão é o que nós chamamos de opressão física. E ela tem a ver com, literalmente, tentativa de controlar corpos, horários de trabalho, atividades, o que se verifica no computador, para quem se telefona, onde as reuniões acontecem. A segunda forma de opressão é a opressão sobre processos administrativos rotineiros, ou seja, aquilo que atinge o coração da ação burocrática. E ela se materializa, por exemplo, com a troca de chefias administrativas por chefias políticas, com a proibição de usos de sistemas de informação, apagamento da memória institucional, mudança de procedimentos administrativos. Em terceiro lugar, nós temos o que chamamos de opressão moral ou relacional, social, e ela se dá pela proibição da relação dos burocratas com atores externos ou internos às organizações. Ela também se dá com processos de humilhação, assédio moral, processos administrativos contra os profissionais, invalidação do conhecimento técnico ou burocrático. E, por fim, nós temos uma última opressão que nós denominamos de silenciamento ou apagamento dos burocratas. E ela se dá, por exemplo, com os vários processos de censura que têm operado dentro do governo federal, com as leis da mordaça que proíbem publicação, com a exclusão dos servidores dos processos decisórios e assim por diante. Embora essas várias formas de opressão sejam operadas por diferentes reações, existem dois aspectos fundamentais para elas operarem. O primeiro é o processo de politização, que significa a troca das chefias que têm perfil técnico por chefias que têm perfil político e que topam implementar o jogo de mudança operado pelo governo. E a segunda característica é a criação de um ambiente de medo e opressão dentro do serviço público. Em ambas essas formas, né, tanto na politização como a criação do ambiente de medo, o processo de militarização que vem ocorrendo no governo federal tem um papel fundamental, porque, por um lado, a militarização permite a troca das chefias por alguém que cumpra a missão governamental, e, por outro lado, a militarização é muito efetiva na criação de um clima de medo. E, ao fim, na medida em que se cria esse processo de medo, de politização, de troca das chefias, a consequência é que nós temos cada vez mais a tentativa de diminuir a autonomia da burocracia, diminuir a subjetividade dos burocratas, desumanizando-os, o que ajuda e facilita o processo de mudança e desmantelamento das instituições. Por outro lado, como eu mencionei, as ações opressoras, elas são acompanhadas de tentativa de reações por parte da burocracia. E nós estamos mapeando na nossa pesquisa 4 formas de reações anti-opressoras operadas pelos burocratas. A primeira forma de reação anti-opressora é o que nós, e a literatura já tinha mapeado isso, chamamos de ação subversiva. Ela é composta por atividades secretas que visam sabotar os políticos ou minar a capacidade de mudança. Temos vários exemplos. Por exemplo, reduzir carga de trabalho, que a literatura chama de shirking, seguir a lei ao pé da letra para boicotar os pedidos de mudança, vazar informações para a mídia ou para o Ministério Público, usar o sistema quando é proibido usar o sistema, usar linguagem técnica que a chefia não compreende, acionar relações externas por baixo dos panos. A segunda forma de reação é o que nós chamamos de resistência. A resistência é uma ação aberta, pública, que verbaliza o problema e a opressão. Em geral, ela é coletiva. Exemplos: entrar com ação via sindicato, falar na imprensa, entrar com processos judiciais, fazer protestos e manifestos. A terceira forma de reação é o que nós chamamos de sobrevivência. E ela é marcada pela realização das ações mínimas necessárias para garantir o funcionamento das políticas públicas como uma lealdade à política pública, mas não ao político. Ou seja, ela é o mínimo necessário para garantir que a política não morra. E, por fim, nós temos uma última forma de reação, que é o abandono ou a desistência. Essa é uma forma de reação que é resultado da consequência máxima da opressão, né? Ela é marcada por quando os burocratas sucumbem, saem da organização, pedem licença e não aguentam mais. Nesse sentido, ela é a única forma de reação que não gera uma nova forma de ação, porque, ao final, é como se o governo, como se os políticos tivessem ganho esse cabo de guerra entre a política e a burocracia. O que nós temos visto é que essas várias formas de ação e de reação foram mudando ao longo do tempo, em função dos contextos, do grau de conflito e de ambiguidade das mudanças. Em cada ministério a gente tem visto processos diferentes, mais de um grau, menos de outro grau. O perfil dos burocratas ajuda a explicar também as diferenças, se eles possuem relações externas ou não, e assim por diante. Mas um elemento que é muito evidente nas nossas análises é que quando nós comparamos a época do impeachment com o governo Bolsonaro, as capacidades de reação da burocracia vêm diminuindo e cada vez mais nós temos visto processos de desistência ou abandono. E isso se dá justamente porque nós temos visto cada vez mais ações opressoras por parte do governo, usando estratégias que vão minando a subjetividade, a autonomia e a capacidade de resposta da burocracia. Por exemplo, cada vez menos temos resistências individualizadas, mas temos resistências coletivas, cada vez mais temos abandono e desistência. É importante lembrar que o processo geral de moldar a burocracia faz parte da normalidade democrática. Faz parte da normalidade democrática que políticos queiram fazer a sua agenda ser implementada utilizando as regras do jogo e mudando a burocracia, né? Isso com mudanças de regras, com mudança de chefia, eventualmente, mudanças de procedimentos administrativos. Mas no nosso caso, neste momento, o que nós estamos falando é de um outro fenômeno, que é a tentativa de moldar a burocracia fora do jogo democrático e institucional, e que se materializa na construção de sistemas opressores que não são legitimados institucionalmente. E esse fenômeno que nós começamos a verificar durante o governo Temer, mas que se acentuou profundamente durante o governo Bolsonaro, é claramente parte de uma agenda mais ampla de mudanças da própria estrutura estatal no Brasil. As várias formas de desqualificação e enfraquecimento dos servidores públicos que nós temos acompanhado nos últimos anos enfraquecem cada vez mais a capacidade de reação da burocracia. É importante lembrar, por exemplo, a frase do ministro da Economia de que os servidores são todos parasitas. Além disso, também é importante lembrar a própria reforma administrativa que está em discussão nesse momento no Congresso Nacional. E uma das principais medidas da reforma administrativa é o fim da estabilidade para uma parte importante dos servidores públicos. Sem estabilidade, servidores ficam cada vez mais receosos de resistir ou de reagir às práticas de mudança. E, portanto, fica cada vez mais fácil fazer transformação e mudança institucional, como, por exemplo, todo o desmonte dos órgãos ambientais, que inclusive o próprio professor Ricardo Galvão já mencionou, a diminuição da capacidade de fiscalização do Estado brasileiro, a desestruturação do SUS, entre várias outras medidas que ficam muito mais fáceis de serem operadas na medida em que a burocracia vai se enfraquecendo. Assim, para fechar, para entender esse processo, é importante lembrarmos também da frase dita por Bolsonaro nas primeiras semanas de sua gestão. A frase dele foi: nós temos que desconstruir muita coisa, desfazer muita coisa, para depois recomeçarmos a fazer. Bolsonaro tem seguido à risca este propósito a partir de ações opressoras cada vez mais efetivas. O que nós estamos vivendo no Brasil e em outros países mostra exatamente os riscos que Weber apontava de como a continuidade do Estado, das instituições, da legalidade e da democracia ficam em risco quando a burocracia é enfraquecida. Muito obrigada.
Gabriela, thank you very much. Ricardo, thank you very much for these excellent presentations. I'm going to go ahead and make a few remarks, and then I will turn to some more specific questions for Ricardo and Gabriela. And following that, we will open it up to some of the questions coming into the chat, which you are welcome to go ahead and post now, and we will get to subsequently. So the brilliant title of today's presentation reminds us that doing one's job and keeping one's job can be very much at odds, as do the presentations by Ricardo and Gabriela. And this reminded me of Albert Hirschman's famous phrase, exit, voice, and loyalty. Hirschman, the great economist, political scientist, was thinking about how dissatisfied individuals in states and in organizations and in firms can respond, and suggested that they can either leave, exit, or what Gabriela calls abandonment. They can remain loyal and try to survive, or they can voice their concerns. And as Ricardo so prominently demonstrated, this is an important voice is an important way to think about what to do in the face of administrations that may be denialistic of science in and of itself. And so I think that those are three options, and I think that the presentations today do mention them and give us a sense of the importance of thinking about them. But there is another option that lies somewhere in between. Quiet, active resistance from within. As Gabriela so eloquently demonstrated, that along with voice or exit or loyalty, there's another option. And sometimes it looks like sabotage or subversion or quiet efforts that cumulatively seek to preserve the existing institutions. And so Ricardo Galvão so eloquently highlighted the challenges faced by the scientific community working under denialistic administrations. And he offers us what I see as the beginning of a framework for responsibly carrying out duties, arguing that while science is not separated from politics, that individuals working in science ought to stick to science. And I think he brilliantly shows how that offers them leverage, relying on their expertise, and allows them to continue in whatever way they can to voice their concerns. I thought this was a very powerful demonstration of a way in which someone within the bureaucracy can voice their concerns. And I'm going to get to some specific questions that I'd like to ask Ricardo later. But first, I want to turn to some other remarks. Gabriela also illustrates how Brazilian bureaucrats facing political interference have developed both practices of opposition and protection, such as resistance, sabotage, silence, shirking. And she shows that this is especially important under administrations that have authoritarian tendencies. What is fascinating about this panel and the focus on dissent is that it is very often overlooked entirely by social science literature. Indeed, the strong focus of political science on principal-agent relations or patronage-client exchanges has obscured important, nay, I would say in this case, heroic actors within the public administration. And this panel powerfully reminds us of the heroic role that so many face in the difficult day-to-day work of governments and in this difficult tension of attempting to do your job and keep your job. These heroic efforts often come at a personal price. This price, as Gabriela mentioned, of physical safety, financial security, even as Ricardo mentioned, of their own jobs. But much of the literature on bureaucratic actors has focused on political actors as principals, often assuming it is the principal that wants what is in the public interest, and conceptualizing bureaucrats or public sector workers as self-interested and wanting to shirk from work. The presentations here are a powerful rejoinder to this conceptualization and reveal that often political actors, unfortunately, do not want what is in the public interest, and that instead public servants in many cases are those who are responding to the public interest. Of course, another strain of the literature focuses on patron-client relations, and these are important to study, of course. But these analyses often miss the mark because they assume no autonomy or little expertise of public sector workers. The presentations today show that public sector workers' interests often coincide with the public interest, and that in many ways, public servants are able, in large and in small ways, to a certain degree, to act autonomously. And in doing so, in many cases, their work safeguards the public interest and they serve as defenders of the public good. And indeed, scholars such as Carpenter and others who study street-level bureaucracy, including Gabriela, have recognized the importance of this discretion, and in certain cases, the considerable autonomy that some actors are afforded. And I believe that this understanding of public sector workers' efforts to resist, their active subterfuge, and their efforts to voice their concerns matters to, as does taking in, and matters and is an important step forward in understanding democratic governance, and especially under populist authoritarian administrations. So what allows actors within the bureaucracy to play this powerful role, and how long can it be sustained? This is a question I'm going to ask Gabriela and Ricardo to a certain degree. But I think before I turn it over to them, I think it's helpful to put Brazil in some context and build on Gabriela's mention here of Weber. Vis-a-vis so many countries in Latin America and indeed in the world, Brazil, at least Brazil at the federal level, has very strong mechanisms for meritocratic recruitment to the civil service and for stability in the civil service. In addition, public sector wages, especially at the federal level, are quite high. And although many people would argue that this is detrimental to budgets, it also means that Brazil is able to attract high-level experts into the federal sector. Thus, individuals in Brazil, such as Ricardo Galvão, are attracted to working in the public sector. Moreover, as Weber hypothesized, meritocratic recruitment and stability can foster an esprit de corps among experts within the government, a commitment to a common set of goals, such as the scientific method or public health principles. And although within the public sector, such commitments are not monolithic, they often stand in stark contrast to many political, from the political class, who respond, of course, to a greater degree to a political calculus. We also know that political actors are limited in their ability to understand the vast range of policy issues they are faced with, and they often have shorter time horizons. And this is what opens up space for experts with a greater understanding of the details in a particular area and longer time horizons to use that expertise and linkages to other areas of the government, NGOs, and the media to quietly resist political directives, as Gabriela so eloquently showed. I am going to, Andresa, I see here that Aaron has joined us. Would you like me to pause my comments and we can invite him into the conversation, Andresa?
Yes, hi, Aaron. Thank you for joining. My suggestion would be that since you made this wonderful question to Ricardo and Gabriela, and just maybe before they forget your question, that they have a chance to reply to you, and then we listen to Aaron, and then we get the questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up and I'll reiterate some of the questions I have for Gabriela and Ricardo, and then we'll turn it over to Aaron. And Ricardo, I wanted to ask you in a more specific sense, in your opinion, for all of those individuals who remain in the public sector, who are working in labs, I am curious about your reaction. To what extent or at what point is it more important to use voice and to stick with science? And to what extent should experts within the public sector seek to employ some of the strategies that Gabriela was indicating here in her conversation? I really appreciated your call to stick to science, but I'm wondering to what extent that means trying to actively resist from within inside, or trying to go outside and voice complaints to a broader media and public to shed light on issues. And I'm wondering how you think about that, especially for many of the individuals who remain in the public sector. And Gabriela, for you, I found this a fascinating discussion, and I'm wondering about when is this most effective, and at what point individuals need to shift their strategies, and how you think about that move from subterfuge or sabotage within to abandonment versus voice. So thank you very much. I'll let the two of you respond, and then we'll move to Aaron's comments.
Well, I believe I'm the first one to answer, right? Your point was very important, Katherine. And in my presentation, I mentioned my strong reaction to President Bolsonaro. To be specific about your question, that depends very much on the level of assail from the government on the public service or on science. Actually, to make it more clear what I'm saying, when the attack on INPE by the government started in January 2019, the Minister of Environment started in social media and also in newspapers, accusing the system of INPE of monitoring the Amazon rainforest to be not good enough for the government to take measures against deforestation of the Amazon. So what I did, for 6 months, I react precisely as you said, within the system. So I started writing reports from INPE, and within the government, sending these official reports to the Minister of Science and Technology, which I was under him, explain what the INPE was doing. And at the same time, because I had the advantage of being in the scientific community, I use colleagues in the Brazilian Academy of Science and the equivalent of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We have the Brazilian Society for the Advancement of Science. And within those communities, I discussed with them, and they started to make some pressures on the government, sending reports, etc. But the government did not react. So when it comes to a point where there is no way of reaching a compromise, And when this action is very dangerous for the society, like we have deforested over 20% of the Amazon rainforest. If we advance to deforestate around 25%, the tendency of the Amazon rainforest to become a savanna is irreversible. So when this point of being verity of no return approaches, then the public servants, the scientists, they have to react strongly. But normally, they have to combine the two mechanisms.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Gabriela.
Thank you, Kate. Your comments were really, really nice. First, I would like to say that we are dialoguing with Hirschman, with Rebecca Aberson, someone just quoted her here, and also and all of these concepts. And I agree with you that we have some changes here observing the Brazilian environment, and this is what we want to contribute to the literature, showing how we have a different kind of environment to do this kind of research. And yeah, that's it. So I think that there's one question that you make me, and I would really like to answer this in the future and know the answer. That's about how much this is sustainable over time. Of course, we don't know, but that's why also I brought the issue of the reform, the administrative reform that is under discussion now, because if this one is approved, we will have a big problem, because we will just change this meritocratic recruitment that you were talking about. That is really very important to explain how the federal bureaucracy became so strong and is able to react. So this is something that we have to see in the future, and of course fight against this reform. But specifically about your last question, we are still analyzing the data. We are still in the middle of the interviews. Actually, we did 80, but we want to do more, and we are looking at more ministries. But what I can say from now, Kate, is that we are looking for two levels of capacity of reaction, of two levels of resilience. The first one is individual one. And we are seeing a lot of differences, like, for example, bureaucrats that are able to show how they are unique in their expertise. They have more resilience to say, no, stop, I have to stay here, I say no. And bureaucrats who are like one more between a lot of others, they are less resilient, and they are more capable of abandonment. Of course, this has a lot to do with what Ricardo was saying about the expertise, the technical expertise. It's just like academics, scientifics, like if no one can substitute me, I am stronger. So this is one level of analysis. The other one is the collective resilience. Because of course, if you work in a place where you have a strong network, everybody supports each other, you have a strong union or association, your organization is more isolated, is more autonomous, to use the carpenter's concept, then of course this group of bureaucrats are more able to collectively react. They have more resilience. But again, we are still working on this to make this kind of differences. What I can say is that it's not because bureaucrats have stability and they have merit. This is not the reason why they can stay, they can react more or less, because this government is just improving the strategies of oppression, using sometimes the processes, I don't know the name of this in English, but processes that you can just take people out of the job and say that they did something wrong. So stability is not enough, but it's very important, just to end the answer. So.
Thank you, Gabriela. I'd now like to introduce our third panelist. Dr. Aaron Ansell is a cultural anthropologist and an associate professor of religion and culture at Virginia Tech. His research focuses on the intersection of social policy, expressive culture, and patron-client relations in the Southeast Piauí state. Aaron.
Thank you very much, and my deepest apologies for coming in late. I miscalculated the time change to my great embarrassment, and I will try to salvage this with remarks that were perhaps briefer than those that I had initially intended. Okay, well, thank you to Andresa and to Katherine for inviting me to speak today. Like many of you, I'm interested in the administrative reforms that President Bolsonaro has sent to Congress. And I won't be able to analyze these reforms in any great detail, but I do want to establish what I think is an important framework for evaluating their impact on the Brazilian state, particularly at the municipal level with which I am the most familiar. My framework centers on the Weberian distinction between legal rational states whose bureaucracies function impersonally, and patrimonial states in which offices are captured by private elites and used for rent extraction. In one variant of patrimonialism, elites stay in power by forging patron-client relationships with citizens that involve the exchange of public resources for votes, sometimes called clientelism. That way they can remain in office while doing little to bring about policies that benefit the public, the poor especially. Now, I'm usually the guy who uses ethnography to illuminate the overlooked inner ethics of so-called patrimonialism in the Brazilian countryside, but today I'm going to be a stodgy Weberian modernist. So patrimonialism and clientelism represent longstanding concerns among Brazilian thinkers. Indeed, this motif has become so hegemonic that the fight against patrimonialism represents a rare common ground among various ideological projects in Brazil, including the two that mark the poles of electoral politics today, that of the new right represented by Bolsonaro and that of the left-leaning PT, the Workers' Party, that preceded Bolsonaro, Temer. I argue that one, despite their shared antipathy to patrimonialism or clientelism, the PT and Bolsonaro regimes differ with respect to their diagnoses of the root cause of these ills. Moreover, both regimes engaged in different anti-patrimonialist strategies predicated on their separate diagnoses. And two, my ethnographic experience in Southeast POE state, which began in 2003, suggests that the PT achieved considerable success in depatrimonializing key currencies of municipal governance. As for Bolsonaro, my fieldwork suggests his policies will re-patrimonialize those same currencies. And I extend that worry to his proposed administrative reforms. I'd like to discuss how Bolsonaro's new right and the PT-led left attribute different causes to patrimonialism and go about fighting it differently. And I know there's plenty of room for charges of hypocrisy here on both sides, but I'm going to hold that in abeyance for right now. I'll begin with the perspective of the new right. So what does Bolsonaro mean when he says he's going to end the velha política, the toma lá da cá, the mamata, the old politics, the give and take, the suckling from the state? Let me show you a PSL propaganda film that circulated on the WhatsApp groups of my friends in POE state during 2018. The PSL, or the Social Liberal Party, is of course the party that launched Bolsonaro's candidacy that year, though the film is associated with another PSL candidate, one Fernando Francischini, who ran for Congress in Paraná. Do I have share screen ability here? I do. I think I do.
Yeah. Try, and if not, I can help.
Here we go.
Great.
Pai, você podia me explicar como é que funciona a política?
A política? Minha filha, às vezes a resposta... Vamos sentar aqui um pouco. Às vezes a resposta está até ao nosso redor. Vamos só debaixo dessa árvore. Eu vou lhe explicar. Tá vendo aqueles animais, aquelas galinhas? Faça de conta que aí são os eleitores. Meninos, mulheres, homens. Venham, vamos conversar sobre política, sobre honestidade, transparência, trabalho justo e fiel. Venham! Honestidade, trabalho justo, transparência, fidelidade. Viu? Não veio ninguém. Agora faça de conta que aqui é a prefeitura. Aqui tudo são cargos públicos, cargos comissionados. Quem quer cargo comissionado? Ande! Ande, olha só. Emprego para a família. Emprego para os parentes. Festa para as crianças, fim de ano. Tudo para vocês, venham, venham. Olha, cargos comissionados, secretarias, verbas para projetos de vocês, para favorecer só o seu vereador, olha, empregos em hospitais para deixar vocês amarrados. Viu que vieram todos? É assim a política no nosso Brasil. E eu vou continuar meus afazeres.
Okay. All right, now I've yet to hear back from Deputy Francisquini as to whether his campaign produced or had any knowledge of this film, but the film's message certainly is consistent with PSL ideology. The film implies that the state itself, at least its social service branch, is inherently patrimonialist and opposed logically and ethically to fair work, transparency, and so forth. More specifically, fair work is contrasted with commissioned jobs. The farmer's agricultural labor, the tasks he says he must return to at the end, seem to epitomize fair work and serve as a mythic stand-in for the sort of private sector labor conducive to a human dignity rooted in self-sufficiency, the opposite of the silly, beggarly chickens. State patrimonialism is thus represented as the necessary consequence of the animalistic, herd-like nature of the Brazilian citizenry, really the Brazilian poor. Now, the association of the poor with livestock runs deep in Brazilian historiography. You can find it in the works of Vitor Nunes Leal, and it carries all the way through to Bolsonaro himself, who, if you'll recall, did a publicity stunt in 2018, handing out feed grass to PT supporters in Copacabana, saying, here's your Bolsa Familia. So it's not just government jobs that are vilified in the new right model of patrimonialism, it's also anti-poverty resources themselves, which Bolsonaro has long regarded as currencies of vote buying. Now, one might object, the farmer in the film was mainly critiquing commissioned jobs. That is the subset of government jobs that most often function as clientelist currency because those holding them are appointed by executives and don't require the civil service exam, the concurso público. After all, didn't the PT equally dislike commissioned positions so much that it expanded the number of government positions requiring the civil service exam? Yes. So one would expect the same from Bolsonaro's administrative reform, right? Not necessarily. In the film, the commission job serves not as the literal object of right-wing critique, but more as a symbol of the imputed sameness of public resources doled out clientelistically, projects that benefit your council persons, and the machinery of the state responsible for such distribution, secretarias, bureaus. What's critiqued is the helpful state doubling as clientelist currency, a critique that exempts other aspects of the state from the charge of patrimonialism, like, say, the military police. Let me move on to discuss the PT's conception of patrimonialism and clientelism. In 2000, Lula filmed an ad in which he said that, quote, regrettably in Brazil, the vote is not ideological. Regrettably, you have a part of society that, due to its high level of poverty, is led to think with its stomach and not with its head. To think, that is, for who they're going to vote for. Lula and the PT understand patrimonialism not as the product of the flawed Brazilian citizenry, but as the result of their circumstantial poverty. That's why President Dilma Rousseff claimed back in 2013 that the Bolsa Familia program, quote, swept away hundreds of years of clientelist politics, end quote. Now, the PT did not sweep away clientelism or patrimonialism in Brazil, certainly not in the municipalities I came to know in the semi-arid region of Piauí state. Yet PT social policy did depatrimonialize the delivery of certain social policies at the municipal level. Indeed, PT policies like Zero Hunger and Bolsa Familia and 1 million cisterns and My House, My Life were designed to prevent the cooptation of federal resources by subnational executives, mayors and governors, et cetera. These policies all intersected with local circuits of clientelist exchange. Specifically, the influx of PT anti-poverty resources devalued pre-existing clientelist currencies through a process akin to market inflation. Clearest example lies with anti-drought policy. It wasn't enough for Lula to build 1 million rain-fed cisterns across the rural zone, one for every household. During drought years, you need someone to fill them. Local politicians own a bunch of trucks, and they paste their names to the bumpers of those trucks when they or their cronies drive around the municipality filling the cisterns of those families at an electoral price. But in 2012, under Josefi, Operation Watercar began contracting local truck drivers who were selected by lottery to do the same job, but better, more comprehensively, and with more attention to water quality and their environment and the environmental impact. Rural people who had previously been silent about the sale of votes for water began reporting to my assistants that they no longer had to engage in this shameful practice. Shameful because they conceive of water as a guarantor of sacred human life cycles and thus condemn its instrumentalization within politics. The PT thus flooded a once clientelistic market, thereby reducing the value of politician brokered water to the point where it wasn't worth a morally denigrated electoral bargain. That particular resource was depatrimonialized. I use the past tense because many PT era programs have suffered under Bolsonaro and his Minister of Economy, Paulo Guedes. Last month, Guedes cut 100% of the federal resources to Operation Watercar, shuttering that program. And there have been major cuts to Bolsa Familia and My House, My Life, and other programs, most of which were in the works well before any COVID-related revenue decline. Moreover, despite presenting himself as the hero of those truck drivers suffering sharp increases in fuel costs, Bolsonaro appointed a Petrobras CEO who did nothing to offset those increases and did nothing to increase the payments of the truck drivers. So as prices soared, those private water car drivers who had been selected by lottery began resorting to a host of underhanded practices to maintain minimal profitability. These include grabbing water from nearby ecologically vulnerable reservoirs, disattending to subsets of remotely located rural households, and outright quitting. Those families who saw their federal cistern filling services decline now face pressure to resort to the other game in town for filling them, politician brokered water cars. Also, as enough drivers quit, the lottery has to be redone. Who throws their hat in the ring? Local politicians. It's not allowed, but they can do it under the table by gifting trucks to others and then adding those trucks to the lottery, sometimes 5 or 6 trucks, 1 or 2 of which will guarantee to be selected for the job. And that job doesn't break even in money, but it breaks even in votes. So the rising price of fuel both leads to the revaluation of clientelism under renewed conditions of scarcity and clientelism's infiltration of water policies that previously did a good job of keeping it out, re-patrimonialize the water resource. Now, I admit the ethnographic data supporting these claims concerning informal local practices would not stand up to social scientific scrutiny. So fine, treat what I've said as speculation guided by the impressions of local people, truck drivers included. But if I'm correct about the big picture changes, then we should at least be suspicious about the impacts of Bolsonaro's proposed administrative reforms. And these reforms themselves give us reason for suspicion. First, the reforms call for the extinction of municipalities with fewer than 5,000 inhabitants and low tax revenues. That's a lot of lost public jobs, about 150 per municipality. But more to the point, all of the basic health and primary education services that municipal governments had implemented since redemocratization will get turned over to larger neighboring municipalities whose services are already oversubscribed. That will lengthen the queues at the SUS health posts. So there's going to be more politicking to jump the queue or to enlist private doctors in exchange for political support. Municipal ambulance services will be overburdened. Politicians will fill that gap, ferrying the sick and injured to hospitals in the dead of night with their pickup trucks. That yields electoral gratitude. Second, the reforms would indeed replace the much loathed commission jobs and confidence jobs that are so often used in clientelist currencies because they don't require the concurso. But the reforms will replace them with equally temporary and capriciously staffed jobs that likewise require no concurso. These are called the jobs for leadership and personal assistance. I don't know quite how to translate asesoramento. So you might think that the administrative reforms present no change in this regard because the ratio of concursado to non-concursado jobs might remain the same, but no. The new leadership jobs will include technical, strategic, and managerial functions once reserved to permanent civil servants, according to Antonio Augusto Queiroz. It's the technical part that's new. What does that mean? How many technical tasks, once completed by politically immune concursados, will pass into the hands of mayors' cronies? I don't know, but those tasks are likely to be re-patrimonialized because they will be done by people appointed with full mayoral discretion. And finally, consider that the new post-concurso, quote, holistic stage of evaluation, under that, executives, it will be easier for them to deny permanent status to those tracked for stable employment, cargos típicos do Estado. All of this amounts to what unions are calling the little tear, the little crack, the rachadinha, the ripping away of the state from hard-to-fire unionized workers with civil service exam bona fides, and the re-embedding of key governmental functions in temporary positions subject to patrimonialist logics. In some, both the PT-led left and the Bolsonaro-led new right partake of long-standing Brazilian concerns with patrimonialism, but they reckon patrimonialism differently and pursue different avenues of fighting it. The PT attributes patrimonialism to circumstantial desperation and fights it with a strategy of flooding clientelist exchange circuits with hard-to-co-opt resources that result in the devaluation of clientelist currencies and improved social service delivery. Bolsonaro attributes patrimonialism to the helpful state itself and to the character of the Brazilian nation. He fights it by making cuts to social services, including passive cuts associated with non-intervention in key areas like fuel cost. I suspect that this strategy has revalued clientelist currencies and thus repatrimonialized social service delivery. In light of this broader framework, several aspects of Bolsonaro's proposed administrative reforms may well have a detrimental effect on the hard-won impartiality of Brazilian governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. And in the interest of time, I'm going to cede my question to Andresa for Aaron. Go ahead, Andresa.
Well, thanks. Actually, my question is perhaps for the panelists, and Aaron could have the privilege of answering that one since he arrived now. The question is, we see just after actually Ricardo Galvão's experience in INPE when he was sacked by Bolsonaro's administration, then we had a similar event when diplomats, they wanted to criticize the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, and perhaps to avoid the same situation, I remember that they wrote an anonymous letter. And then we start seeing in Brazil that people who usually have the cultural, the political capital, such as people who live in big cities, people who have full employment, who are either sacked or who feel so vulnerable that they use anonymous letters, or many of them just silence, as we saw in the presentations. And then we are also used to see silence or lack of protests, or as a sort of agreement. And then we have to see silence as the major form of oppression and perhaps just dissent. And this becomes not only difficult to be studied, as Gabriela was mentioning, but also it may lead to a sort of advocacy that can start happening, which I see a little bit of people who resort to people who are abroad to make certain claims, or sometimes join events overseas and say something, but things that they wouldn't say if they were in Brazil. So my question is a little bit of what is our role? And by our role, I mean for people like Kate, who's chairing us today, like Katherine and myself, who are in academia abroad, but also other Brazilians in exile who may have, by a privilege of distance, voice, so that our like forms of disagreements not only silence, as we have seen.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron. I see you're gonna respond to that. You're on mute, Aaron.
Only just to echo the validity of the question that this is indeed happening. As far as what we can do about it, I think within our respective areas of expertise, we could vouchsafe the workings of this kind of political persecution. So rather than, for instance, myself, I have some expertise in Piauí State and the rural Grutões, rather than talk about events in the news in Brasilia, I think I can relate many, many stories of marcação política at that local level in order to demonstrate how saturated the political culture is with this phenomenon and its susceptibility to this phenomenon under conditions of say, the administrative reforms that I was discussing. And I think we can do that with our respective fields of expertise.
I'm going to pose one, in the interest of time, we're going to do one more question from the group. This question is from Maria Isabel Bahia. She starts by thanking the presenters, and she's wondering about a practical question about strategy to tackle fake news. She asks, how do we control the narrative and the attacks to democratic institutions? How do we stick to science in a post-truth era? Any thoughts on this from our discussants? Ricardo, I might allow you to go first, since sticking to science is commenting on your presentation.
Well, that's a very important question and touch issue that we have not discussed today. It is the question of social media. You know, social media has been very strongly used by by denialists and other people in government to attack science and also for all other claims, even outside science. And what makes very difficult this strategy is that social media naturally is very superficial. So every time you want to provide a proper answer, use the scientific methodology, for instance, we are in trouble because, you know, many of when it is a scientific issue, just to change to the situation of Brazil now, the attack of President Bolsonaro on vaccines and his claim that chloroquine works. So this is a very superficial, he can say that he does, but using few words in social media, he can claim those results. To answer to that, we need deep answer. We need scientific arguments, and that is what is making very difficult. So we now in this academy in Brazil, we're now trying to work more strongly on social media to provide proper answers to those questions. And I think that's very important in the future.
Thank you. A few more questions here. This is a question for Aaron. Could you comment on the potential effects, if any, of the COVID-19 auxilio emergencial on the clientelistic dynamics you described? We also have another question for Ricardo Galvão. Given the political attacks on the INPE, can we trust the current data they are producing? Are you optimistic about the future of the agency, especially given the launch of the satellite Amazonia 1? And finally, a question that asks why, as it seems obvious to me, the author, why that most Brazilian stakeholders are dormant when the subject is environment. And the second question is it environment actually being subject of conflict, or the environment as camouflage and distraction maneuver for other interests? Okay, Ricardo, if you want to go ahead and hit the question I asked you, and then we'll go Aaron and Gabriela if you have any thoughts or any comments.
Well, I'm very optimistic about the results of INPE. because INPE is a very strong scientific institution with a very high reputation worldwide. So it's not easy for the government to attack INPE or try to curb its results. The scientists in INPE are outstanding scientists. Just to see last year, the scientists of INPE had, I believe, around 10 papers in Nature and Science, and some of them on the front cover. So it's very hard for the nihilist government to attack such an institution. And so far, since I left, all the results of INPE, they are trustworthy. It is almost impossible to stop that because first, satellites are all over the world. European Space Agency, the NASA, and the others have results from the Amazon rainforest. So it would be very hard for the government to try to hide that. The second question, I think I forgot it.
Aaron, maybe you can jump in while I find it and relate it.
Sure. Well, so the question to me was about the effects of the COVID-19 auxílio emergencial on the clientelist dynamics that I was describing. Bolsonaro has benefited greatly at the subnational level where I've done my research from the COVID-19 and the emergencial, the monies, the 600 reais per month. Let me explain. Clientelist dynamics are dynamics of care at the local level. That is to say, when a clientelist subject, a clientelist relationship is a relationship of tenderness and care and recognition of somebody's moral worth from a politician who gets out of bed at 4 in the morning to go help them, to touch their body, to bring their body onto a truck, to caress them, etc., to make them feel worthy. These are all corporal dimensions of clientelism. To the extent that the social distancing imposed by COVID restricted that aspect of clientelist care, of proximity, of marching together, of being in the same car together, clientelism became the enemy of COVID, and the immediate relationship of care, I think, generally won. That is, people preferred the care of clientelism over those restrictions. And because Bolsonaro stood against those restrictions, the social distancing restrictions, he became the indirect beneficiary of a local refusal to give up care in the name of social distancing. And because his administration did channel 600 a month to people for a long time, he became associated with that personally, notwithstanding the fact that his administration wanted a reduced amount of distribution early in that process. So his stock has risen in the Sertão. I don't know by how much.
Should I go? Yeah, okay, I'm going in Portuguese, okay? Eu queria responder a pergunta do quanto que a área ambiental, ela é uma área que está confundindo ou ela de fato é um projeto. E na minha perspectiva, o que nós temos visto na área ambiental é apenas um exemplo de um projeto que vai ser reproduzido nas outras áreas. Talvez na área ambiental isso comece assim, porque é onde a gente tem os interesses mais claros e as forças mais evidentes para fazer o desmantelamento acontecer, mas para mim é apenas uma experiência do que provavelmente vai tentar ser reproduzido nas várias outras instituições governamentais. Reforço a frase que eu trouxe do Bolsonaro e é o projeto de governo dele. Precisamos reconstruir em terra arrasada, e o primeiro papel é arrasar com tudo. Nós temos acompanhado várias práticas de desconstrução de memória institucional, acabar com sistemas de informação, com indicadores, as propostas de reforma que acabam com a estabilidade dos servidores públicos. Isso tudo vem no mesmo pacote de desconstrução institucional enfraquecimento da burocracia para a construção de um outro modelo, de um outro tipo de governo. Eu acho que não dá para pensar que a área ambiental é uma confusão ou que ela é algo separado do resto, né? Acho que isso vai se reproduzindo de diferentes maneiras, com diferentes táticas, mas isso é um projeto de governo. E, nesse sentido, eu queria finalizar dizendo que, para mim, talvez o que fique mais evidente desse processo todo, Kate, para quem estuda a burocracia, é a importância da gente voltar a reforçar a burocracia como a saída para enfrentar governos populistas e autoritários, né? Lembrando do Max Weber, a burocracia, de fato, é essencial para a manutenção das instituições e da democracia. E desmantelar a burocracia via destruição dos próprios burocratas e das práticas burocráticas é o terreno aberto para a construção de governos autoritários. É isso, obrigada.
Thank you, Gabriela. A question for Ricardo Galvão. How do you see the possibility of denialism within the scientific community and scientists, or people or scientists, science credentials that publicly defend positions against the scientific consensus, supporting denialistic political claims? For example, matters such as chloroquine in Brazil. In your opinion, how can science improve in terms of better communication to the public and policymakers to avoid this kind of noise?
Well, I will start mentioning that this problem has reached a different, new level, currently very high level. Is worrying a lot. I don't know if many of you know this book, maybe I'll try to show to you, has been just published, The War on Science by Sean Otto. That was published by, I think this year, I forgot the editor, but this war on science is really very serious nowadays. And what is happening is that the scientific community was not well prepared to answer to that. Well, see, our outreaching activities in the past was write a newspaper, have science museums, going to TV, and now, as I said, we have the social media that is very strongly used by the nihilists, maybe like how they call car dealers, very quickly messages that somewhat go in the direction of what the public wants to hear. So someone, for making it very clear, someone does not like vaccines. He does not trust vaccines. So when he hears or he reads in the social media someone that's considered important saying that if you take that vaccine, you are going to become a crocodile, he believes on that. Okay? And it's very hard for the scientific community to answer to that. But at least in Brazil, the Brazilian Academy of Science and the Brazilian Society for the Progress of Science, we are working quite strongly to develop tools to react to that. We have to learn how to do it properly. But I believe that at the end, science is going to win.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Aaron. I think all of these presentations have powerfully shown the extent to which institutions to a certain degree are under threat in Brazil, and the efforts that are being made by so many to combat this. And with this, I turn it back over to our organizers and thank everyone for their participation.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be with you today. I learned so much. I actually finished my notebook where I was taking notes. And it was a very important and thought-provoking session. And I hope as many of you as possible can come back next Wednesday at the same time, which is 5 p.m. in the UK, for our third panel session titled O Estado é laico, mas o governo é cristão. Religious Groups in Politics, between tolerance and intolerance.
Next week's discussion will center around the 2018 presidential elections and explore how religious narratives and conservatism reached a crescendo in Brazilian politics. The panelists will be Amy Erica Smith, Ana Carolina Evangelista, David Simsler, and Ariel Goldstein, and the session will be chaired by David Lehman. So I also would like to take this opportunity to thank you all very much for this fascinating discussion. I second Andresa in saying that it was really rich and I gave us all much food for thought. And thank you as well to all our attendees, and hope to see you next week at the same time.